if you lose your joy, you lose your work ethic. And joy is linked to making sure that you're doing things on time, to high standards with minimal waste. So like it's not connected to the systems and the efficiency, because if you're doing it poorly, it's not very much fun.
You're listening to How I Grow This, exploring stories of gardeners from across the globe as we learn from their biggest tips and tricks to some of the things not to do. I'm your host, Luke Hammond.
Well, we are back at it with an exciting episode with Noah Sanders. If you don't know Noah, well, you are going to learn a ton during this episode. Noah, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Luke. I'm really grateful to be here.
Well, one of the things we like to do is jump right into it. So we're diving headlong. Tell me about where you're growing, your not necessarily about your garden space, but like your geographic location, climate, zone, all those things so we can get it out of the way and into the garden.
Yes. So I have been gardening now for, I guess, since probably a little over about 20 years now in East Central Alabama. So we got this red clay soil, very humid climate. We are just a tropical paradise for pests and bugs and fungus and molds and rabbits and white-tailed deer and all those kind of things. I've had people come from other parts of the country to grow in this area, and they're like, wow, I've never grown in some place that's as hard as it is to grow in this spot in Alabama. But we've just found that it's been extremely rewarding. We did market gardening for about 13 years, and now we do homesteading. So we're growing food for our own selves, and we have just really love just that fresh food out of the garden. We love soil. We love seeing this red clay soil produce incredible vegetables, incredible fruits and stuff when you learn to tend it correctly. And I think that's been the big fun thing, is taking dirt in an unideal situation and then in a traditionally challenging air climate, and that everybody's like, oh, I can't grow because I've got red clay. It's like, you realize that's one of the most fertile soils there is if you don't abuse it. And we've seen that over and over again. So that's where we are in Alabama, growing food for our family right now and teaching others how to do the same.
So roughly do you know your latitude offhand? Like how, because you guys are pretty far south. What's your technical growing zone?
Is that a 7B? So okay, we're right on the zone, because literally like the south part of my county is a different. So we're in 7B. So I was just looking it up this morning. Our first frost date's our last frost date's about right now. So typically April 1st is our average last frost date, but you got to watch it because you can get that last coming in, middle of April some years. And then our first frost date is normally around the 1st of November. So we got a pretty good growing season. Mm-hmm. We've still got kind of some four seasons. We're not down South Alabama where it's a little more Florida-ish, but we're not no snow on a regular basis.
Okay. How cold will it get through the winter? Like what are some of your nighttime temps or average harder frost?
So we get a few weeks where we get lows in the 20s, but it's typically going up and down all winter long. And then occasionally we'll hit, probably once a year, we'll hit like teens, and every few years we'll hit single digits. But that's, it's rare, but that'll definitely knock you out because you're not planning on it.
Yeah. Now, what about your high temps?
Yeah, high temps. I mean, there are a few weeks of the year again where we might get over 100 during the day. But in the summer, it's pretty much consistent 90s during the middle of the day. And then again, up and down, we'll get, some nice cooler weathers. But we get about 54 inches of rain a year. It's pretty much spread throughout the year. We'll have a dry spell during the summertime, and we'll kind of have that early, like late winter dry spell. And then we're heading into that wet spring kind of season at the moment.
Gotcha. And your humidity levels, are they just always high? Is it just always humid there?
Oh, no. I mean, we definitely go through, because I'm also part of our volunteer fire department. So whenever we have that cold, like we're aware of like, nobody burn, don't burn.
Gotcha.
You can get that really dry levels at different times of the year, especially end of winter, and when it's cool and it hasn't rained for a while. And then in the summer, it's mostly humid throughout the summer, but it just can vary. I mean, some years we've gone without air conditioning. We live off grid, so we use air conditioning, as we need it. So some summers you can go without it and it's no big deal. Other summers you're like, wow, everything is molding in the house. We better turn on the air conditioning. So
Yeah.
just depend. Air conditioning is, we use it more because of the humidity than that. You can deal with temperature, but that humidity will really, drive you out.
Very, very cool. So tell me a little bit about your garden. Actually privileged enough. We have a bunch of your slides. I'm going to bring them up to the stage
Okay, yeah.
here. So if you are listening outside of just a regular auditory podcast setting, you might want to refer back to these slides as Noah's kind of going through them and describing the process of how he starts an initial garden bed. So just note that if we're referring to a picture, those are available to you on YouTube or anything else like that. So Noah, let's go through the process of how you set up your garden beds in Alabama.
Yes, and for those listening, I will do my best to describe this process. So if you don't see the pictures, you can still kind of get the gist of what we're talking about. I was really blessed when I first started gardening. When I first started kind of homesteading and market farming, we actually, our main business was chickens, because we had some really good models through Joel Salatin and stuff. But gardening was something that I really struggled with for a while. You know, do you plow? Do you what all kind of what's the best method that you could use? And we struggled a lot with our yields initially. And then I went to Africa and learned a technique from an organization called Foundations for Farming, and it was a minimal tillage technique, really just based in, let's go see how God grows stuff in the woods. I mean, Alabama, you can look, if you were seeing this picture all around my house, the woods and the weeds and the bushes and everything, they will take over everything very quickly. When you get 54 inches of rain a year, the soil is fertile. It's not like it can't grow anything. But oftentimes we're struggling to grow stuff in our soil when right next to it, the weeds are, the plants that are native growing there are taking over. So we just go and we say, okay, well, what can we learn from the way this stuff grows naturally? And then how do we apply that in the way that we take care of this soil? So we have red clay, which I love. I actually love gardening in heavy clay soils. They're really, have a high, whatever if you could say, the high cation exchange capacity, which basically means they hold nutrients really well. So they don't, a little bit of fertility, a little bit of compost manure goes a long way. They hold moisture really well. But because of the nature of clay, if you are, they can be easily abused. So for instance, if I go and like in the past, if I rototill up a patch of red clay, it doesn't have a bunch of organic matter in it, and then I plant stuff, it rains, the sun comes out, I have now made bricks, an entire garden of brick from that clay, because of the nature of clay. If I had a sandy soil, I wouldn't really notice it as much. I could get away with that, and I would still, you might have some erosion and some, sand has the issue of a lot of leaching, but you're not going to notice the damage to the soil like you will with a clay soil. And so once we swapped to this kind of new technique that I learned out of Foundations for Farming in Zimbabwe, what we do in this picture that we currently have up, it shows us on a lawn area outside of our homestead that actually was a cut and leveled pad for a building I was going to put there. So if you can picture, I've got the hillside here, but we tried to level it in order to put a building there. And later I was like, it's actually a really nice, I don't have a lot of level land where I live. So I was like, this is actually a great spot for a little kind of kitchen garden. But if you can imagine, we're down to the clay, because we just cut all the topsoil off, right, to cut into the hill and level this thing. And what we're doing what we did is we just laid off where we're going to put in this 20 foot by 20 foot garden right outside our house. And instead of tilling it, we just took hose, and you could solarize or tarp the area as well. But we just removed the weeds manually by hand. And the process that we do is we remove the weeds. And I think, Luke, can I advance through these slides? Would that
Yeah,
be
you
okay?
sure can.
Okay, great. So this shows us beginning the process. This is with a class that we had at our farm. We lay off, the boundaries of our garden, which I love, really nice, tidy garden borders and definitions, because it's just so much easier to manage. You can't manage what you don't measure. And so I love putting in strings and corners and squaring it up where it's really satisfying as you lay it out to see it come together. But we lay out the border. We begin to remove in this case, kind of the grass sod where we've been mowing it, just with, in our case, kind of like a field hoe. that's really heavier, and you can just chop off that grass right below where the roots are growing. In this case, it's not a Bermuda grass, though I've done it with Bermuda grass. And a lot of times when we're dealing with a sod, I will, if it's creeping grass, we're always taking that material out. So we're cutting off the grass right below where it's growing, and then we're carting it off in a wheelbarrow to take somewhere where I don't mind that it grows. And we're just kind of leaving this nice kind of scalped area of dirt that hasn't been disturbed below that. And it's neat because when you walk on it, this red clay, a good clay soil has a pretty good structure. This one had been damaged a bit by the bulldozer that leveled it, but it had been having grass on it for a while. So we had all the root channels, all the the tunnels and stuff that were here from it being kind of fallow for a while. And it had good structure. We weren't sinking into it, but it wasn't compacted either. But we removed all that material. We then laid off, for this particular garden, we like doing kind of planting beds and paths where we're not raising them too much, but in order to get a seed bed initially, we take the dirt from our paths, which in this case, we normally lay off 18 inches or 1.5 feet for a path, and then we'll scoop that dirt onto the growing bed, which is 42 inches or 3.5 feet. And that just makes it sure that if there's water, which right now we just got a lot of rain the last couple of days, it makes sure that the water that might set or gather in your garden is not where your plants are growing. We're not looking for 6 inches of a raised bed, but at least that the low spots are the paths. And then that little bit of loose dirt that we throw from the paths up onto the bed gives us a bit of a seed bed kind of structure to be able to plant into without disturbing the soil that's in the bed itself. And we use strings and stakes to lay off those paths, and we rake it nice and level. And in this case, we had compost to be able to put on just the planting beds, and then leave the paths where we're not wasting the compost on the paths. Then add we like hay mulch or grass mulch that we cut from our farm here, from some fields that we don't have fenced, so we're not grazing them, but it gives us a diversity of multiple kinds of species of plants that are going to be in that mulch, which feeds the biology of the soil better than just a single, Bahia grass or one kind of material. And then we always like to, if possible, use a different kind of mulch for the path to kind of make that stand out and give it a little bit of difference there. And once we water it, all that biology really comes to life, and we've created this natural layered system that mimics what's in the woods. So if we go into Alabama woods, we have red clay, just like an inch or two below the surface, just straight red clay. But on top of that is a thin layer, sometimes maybe a half inch of what we would consider like compost. It's organic matter that's in the process of decomposition from leaves or grass that have died in previous years. So you have red clay, then compost, then fresh mulch from the recently fallen leaves or the grass that's even living on top. And it's that kind of layered system, primarily your dirt with your sandwich of compost underneath mulch, that really provides that fertilizer factory. And once we have done this, we remove the grass, we put compost on top, we put mulch on top of there, and we water it. That biology comes to life, and it starts creating amazing food for the plants that, as you can see, produces an amazing growth with very minimal input. And that's what's been so neat to see, because you're like, we're growing carrots in this, and it was red clay, and we didn't even do any kind of tilling or breaking it up or even broad forking in most cases.
Yeah, well, I have that raises like so many different questions for me. Number one is when you're spreading out the hay or the grass, is that cut at a specific time to where you don't have as many grass seed in that? Are those annual grasses? What species of grass is that? Or have you found that you're just, okay, now I just reseeded my garden space and put a nice fresh layer of compost underneath it? Like how do you do weed management in that sort of context?
Yeah, so whenever we're bringing something into our garden as we're managing, we're kind of the gatekeepers for whatever space that we're choosing to grow things in. So if we're growing fruits or we're growing vegetables or whatever it is, we have different tolerances for other things that are in there, and different, maybe we're having grasses grow underneath an orchard, but in a vegetable garden like this, my tolerance for weeds is obviously very minimal. I really want no invasive grasses, not bringing in a lot of weed seeds and stuff. So I'm going to be much more careful about selecting and making sure that what I'm cutting and what I'm bringing into my garden is not introducing, like you said, things that I've been working hard to eradicate out of it, or things that I didn't have there before that now I'm going to have to deal with. And the biggest things that I would watch out for if I'm cutting for my own farm is anything that's going to grow from a cut stem. So any kind of Bermuda grass or creeping grass, any kind, and obviously one of the things that I think is the most valuable about cutting biomass from your own yard or farm or homestead is you can choose when to cut it. I use a lot of hay from my neighbors that's spoiled or spent. I make sure it's not sprayed. And that's another benefit of getting it myself for my own farm, is I know what's been put on it and not. But they often are still cutting hay when there's seeds in, after the grass has gone to seed, and I have to deal with that some. But over the years, I actually would prefer to add mulch to my garden, even if I get a bit of weed seeds in it, than to not put mulch on my garden. Because if I don't put my mulch on my garden, I have a ton of weeds. If I do put mulch on my garden and it adds a few, it's not like I didn't have, I guess I eventually had to tell myself, Noah, it's not like you don't have weed seeds in your garden. If that was the case, maybe we could be concerned. But you have tons of weeds coming up everywhere. Anyways, we add a few more, but we put enough mulch on there that none of them come up anyways, we're still ahead. And once I kind of took that approach and wasn't so scared of the weed seeds that, again, not noxious plants per se, but this was just Bahia grass. It's a good pasture grass that's not particularly invasive. If it comes up, you can hoe it down. It's not that big a deal. It really, I'm not as scared of weed seeds as I used to be, because they only are ever an issue if I ever let the soil get bare for most weed seeds. And so whenever you see weeds coming up, it's an indicator the mulch is too thin. I want to make myself a sign or a t-shirt that says, mulch, don't weed, because that's, every time I see weeds, I want to go weed, when what I need to do is go mulch. Because if I weed it, I'm going to do it again next week. If I mulch it, I'm not going to have to do it again until next month.
Really good there. I know that we've jumped through those questions. Another highlighted thing that I noticed was you described a very thin layer. It's been pretty common practice for people to add a pretty thick layer of compost. Talk a little bit about that.
So the nice thing about compost, especially if you're teaching new gardeners, is that it's very hard to put the wrong amount of compost on. And the reason is because compost is not like your traditional fertilizer. Fertilizers, I like to say, is like bottle feeding a calf. You are taking the place of the natural fertility system in nature. So you've got to know how much, when, and be very dialed in, or you're going to overfeed the calf or underfeed the calf. Same thing in our garden. You're going to, even with an organic fertilizer where you're maybe making a manure tea or something, you're still giving nutrients directly to the plant accessible nutrients to the soil. And if you're not careful, you can overdo it or you can underdo it. Compost, on the other hand, is like a mama cow, and putting that mama cow with a calf. You don't really have to worry about how much, when, all that, because the mama cow will do what the mama cow needs to do for the calf. Compost is like that. If you did a nutrient analysis of compost, you're not going to find you don't evaluate it by how much soluble nitrogen and phosphorus, potassium is in there right now. It's how much the compost contains the biology to slow release the locked up phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium at real time for those plants in a much more complex, system of exchange and food system, soil food system, than we can really even comprehend. And so when you put that on your garden, it's building in the natural, what we call fertilizer factory for your plants. And so that being said, if you put a little bit, it's good. If you put a lot, it's better. But it is whatever you can put on there that you can afford to that you've made, uh, some will be good, more will be better. And in this case, we're obviously putting about an inch worth of compost on those beds. If we could put 3, 4, 5 inches, that would be great. But at the same time, how many of us homesteaders and gardeners have that much compost that we've made to be able to put on the beds initially?
Right.
Sometimes I'll show maybe another picture here later is if we do uh, when we put in a garden, if I don't have any compost, I'll just go ahead and go straight to the mulch. Erratic move, take the weeds off, lay the beds out, put the mulch on, and that mulch is slowly adding, material, composting. That compost, all it's doing is it's mimicking. If this had been mulched for 5 or 10 years, this is what would be here. But we're going ahead and adding it so we can jumpstart the system and not have to wait 5 or 10 years for just adding mulch to break down in sheet composting to create that system. But even if we don't add the compost right away, we'll mulch it. And then whenever we plant, I'll add compost when I plant, where I plant. And it's obviously not going to be quite as fertile as if I planted on the whole thing all at once. But compost is very forgiving. The more you add, the better it'll be. But whatever you do give it will do something, especially if you're caring for your soil where you're maintaining those 3 layers of mulch on top, compost, and then the soil, undisturbed soil underneath.
Very cool. This seems, while it's really good, for those who might be interested in scaling, I just want to ask the question, is there a level where the workload for this becomes a little bit unattainable? Is there like an acreage amount where it's like, well, no, we get 400 people to do the work? Is this a fairly scalable system in your eyes?
Well, the principles that we try to apply in this the particular system that we're teaching with sticks and strings and hose and that kind of thing, we're teaching principles that are accessible to anybody regardless of what kind of resources they have access to. But the principles we're teaching are, how do we look to the design and creation to learn for how we manage creation? And the couple principles we're applying here is minimal tillage, maximum soil coverage, and then we're building in diversity through crop rotation and building soil through compost. So when you're doing it at scale, you'll have to figure out a different set of tools, a different set of techniques to apply those principles. But I think we're definitely seeing a lot more innovation in this realm of how you can do that with cover cropping or rotating with animals or all sorts of ways that you're going to be doing it on site. For instance, growing your mulch on site, in place and then laying it down versus bringing it in from somewhere else. But what when I was a market gardener, I had 1/4 acre done like this. I had been doing mechanized, but you either have there's this unhappy medium between intensive and extensive. If you're really intensive like I was, 1/4 acre, man, I couldn't pick it all, and it was so abundant, and the quality was such that I had all I needed from 1/4 acre. And that was what one person can handle. This kind of system, if you're doing it full time, 1/4 acre is all I recommend that you handle, but you'll have more than enough to pick off of 1/4 acre. But if you're going to scale to a tractor, and one of my tractor friends always told me, he said, if you're farming with a tractor, don't get off the tractor, you're losing money. Like, figure out a way to do it with a tractor. Then you've got to be big enough and simple enough and extensive enough to pay for your equipment and to keep it where it
maintained.
Fits that. There's 2 different systems. What's really bad is when you're too big to actually take advantage of the high level of management you can do by hand, or you're too small to pay for the equipment that you need to do it at scale. So pick which way you want to go. And on a homestead level right now, for us, obviously the intensive level works, but I think we were able to prove with our business that both are viable. But they're 2 different systems. So same principles apply, though, in terms of soil management for each.
Man, that is so good. I'm going to click through these slides, just a few that we've already gone through of the layers. So remember to reference that. We ended up on this really cool photo that I look at, and I I just kind of go, whoa, that reminds me of one of my favorite movies growing up, one of the best books ever written, or trilogies. That is a Hobbit Garden.
Hmm.
Describe to me, why is that? Like, why is this a Hobbit Garden? What is it in our, like if we've read any of the Lord of the Rings, or anything there, or seen the movies, and you look at
Hmm.
that, there's something about this. What did you do here to make this aesthetic come to life?
So for those of you who aren't seeing this picture, we have this garden that we put in, this little 20 foot by 20 foot garden right outside our house, and we have a wattle fence around it. So that's like a woven fence with saplings that makes it kind of look old worldy, or kind of craft artisan. And so with our family, one of the things I thought about a few years ago, or kind of brought to my attention, a fellow homesteader farmer challenged me with the idea. He said, "How many second generation homesteaders do you know?" And since then, as I've asked people that question, there's a lot of good examples of second generation homesteaders, but there's also a lot of examples of kind of children of back to the land families who got burnt out and went to the city and are like, I don't ever want to have, and it was cool, but there's no way that they would want to do that themselves. And so in trying to learn, like for my kids and my family, like what is it that we're really, that God's called us to do here, with establishing a home, and what are we doing with homesteading? Why aren't we just buying all our food at the store and all that because it's easier? And how can we do it in a way that it's not just about the production and just about the work, but we're prioritizing relationships, prioritizing family, that it's attractive. It's not just anti what the world is doing, what the world's offering, but it's a positive like thing we're doing because we love it. And when I was when you watch the Lord of the Rings, and when you look at what Tolkien kind of developed with the idea of hobbits, it's very much this. It's not the strong warrior, world of men. It's not the very architectural kind of engineering side of the dwarves world, or the big ethereal, beautiful artistic world of the elves. It's very much this love of hearth and home, this love of what you can do with your hand, the simplicity of family and food, and just this culture that I was like, this really uh, is a good picture of a lot of what I feel like God has called our family to kind of model and embrace and show as an alternative, just the consumeristic uh, vision that's given to us by our society at large. But there's you wrestle with this thing where we're competing with what McDonald's and the junk food stuff of the day and video games, and I mean, if you try to beat them at their own game, that's going to be really hard.
Mm.
And it's really hard just to say, hey guys, we're not going to eat this junk food. We're just going to eat healthy food. I mean, for maybe some people that's impressive. My kids are just like, that is not inspiring to want to say, yes dad, our family stands for healthy food. We don't eat all the fun food, we just eat the healthy food. Or we don't go on vacations to the beach as much as everybody else does. We just work in the dirt outside. I mean, so it's like, how do we create a culture that's inspiring and it produces the passion that will then motivate the proficiency, which really comes back to how do we have purpose in what we're doing as well.
Mm.
And so we do have, I think we can cast a vision for purpose for us where we're trying to prioritize family, and we're wanting to serve other people, we're wanting to leave the land better than we left it, all these things that we feel like God values. But where does the rubber meet the road? Culture is when you live out values, right, in a way that allows you to pass them on. And I think today we don't live, I was talking about this with somebody last night, we don't live in this established culture in America of good, wholesome, like traditional values that have maintained us for years that we can just like be a part of. It's not like we live in the Alps in Austria in the late 1800s and it's like, this is what our culture looks like. This is the music we listen to, and this is how masculinity is lived out, and femininity. It's like we are totally unmoored and unhinged in the U.S. in terms of what we even how that looks. And so trying to bring some, like, what does that look like for our family? You've got to have some anchor somewhere that is inspiring. So for us,
Mm.
that was like, okay, instead of healthy food, we talk about in our family, we eat Hobbit food.
There we go.
Yes. So when you look at in the Lord of the Rings, the Bilbo's pantry, his larder, you got the hams hanging and the cheeses, and the bunches of grapes and the fresh head of cabbage, and you're just like, oh, that is so epic. And in fact, that word epic, I think I use it a lot because I start hearing like my 4-year-old say, that is so epic. So epic must be something that we're trying to bring. But we want our gardens not just to be like abundant and like work well and not have pests, but we want, if we have gardens that are epic,
Mm.
then all of a sudden this creates something that our kids want to have fun with and they want to be a part of it. I don't know if you can go quickly to a picture later on with my son is standing with the plants and so in this picture, one of my kids was out working. My oldest son is out working, planting some plants, and but he has his Hobbit outfit on. So it's his straw hat and his, cut off below the knees pants there and his suspenders. And now he's not just helping dad by planting cabbages in the garden. He feels epic while he's working in the garden because we're creating this Hobbit garden with Hobbit food. And we don't try to go over the top with that because it is our family and it's just, we don't want to, we're not like we're trying to make a movie themed thing here. But that's a bit of a good poetic picture that Tolkien created to capture this culture that he felt was important, that he saw, growing up in England that was being lost at the time. And so I'm very grateful for that and think there's things like that are helpful for us that are trying to forge a different path and yet help our kids have a sense of identity of what does it look like that we're doing, and make gardening something that's fun and inspiring, rather than just a countercultural, practical, survivalist thing that our family does that's really weird, and hard and harder and and hot and sweaty and everything.
I think that's so valuable because I think for myself, I'm inspired by this because I will lean into the production and the becoming the farm machine, right? Because I do farm at a little bit larger scale, and it's just like I can get so caught up in straight rows and you kind of lose some of the creativity in what you just described, because I'm systemizing everything, which is how you become mildly successful in market garden, right? But there is kind of that like dichotomy or pull of, we can become successful, but we can lose creativity.
Right.
And I think this is such a really cool example for so many people on how we can bring that life and breathe creativity into that garden space.
And we talk about it in terms of joy. That was one of my mentors in Africa was always telling us, if you lose your joy, you lose your work ethic. And joy is linked to making sure that you're doing things on time, to high standards with minimal waste. So like it's not connected to the systems and the efficiency, because if you're doing it poorly, it's not very much fun. But making sure that you stop work while you still have joy, that there's joy with your team members, your family members that's participating in, and understanding that joy is so important. It's like the fuel right behind the you can have all the plans and everything, but you got your fuel behind your plans is that joy. And so that means if you do something like in one of our market garden beds one time, it was both for biodiversity, but also we put this little pond in the middle of it, in the middle of the plot, with plants around it, and it was for frogs, but it was so fun to be in that plot because it was so beautiful, and it brought an element of joy that we don't want to discount investment in fun and joy, because you will reap like that it will be multiplied in the production and the efficiency and the system and all those other things, because that's really that proficiency again comes from passion, which typically comes from the fun and joy that you hope to get out of what you're doing.
That's so good. So I'm taking notes on this because I'm like, I need this for me. Double click on that again. So when you lose joy, what else do you lose?
Yeah, well, it's kind of this. So there are four principles of management that I learned from my mentors in Africa. And really, it's this is how, if you want to be faithful, which is where profit comes from, you've got to do things. The first three are doing things on time, right? Got to make sure that you're working on time, planting things in season, all that kind of stuff. And then you got to do things to a high standard, excellence, craftsmanship, right? And then
Mm.
you got to do things with minimal waste, where you're utilizing with gratitude every resource that you've got, and you're making sure that you don't have any unnecessary loss. And when you do the first three, actually, when you go out and your garden is planted on time, you're ahead of time, you get the soil plant, the soil prep before you're supposed to plant it, and then you've done it with excellence to a high standard. Your rows are straight. I mean, straight rows. I love straight rows.
Mhm.
You've got a fence around it. You've got all your seedlings. You got uniform germination because you took care of them right. And then minimal waste, like because of the way you're caring for your soil, you don't have any erosion, and you're capturing all of your water, and you're recycling your plants that you're pulling out by composting them. Those first three, when you do those first three, joy is actually the bonus fourth one thrown in for free if you do the
Mm.
first three.
Mm.
Because when you go out to a garden that's managed like that, it's exciting. You want to go out, you see the one weed popping up in the middle of the plot, and you're like, oh man, grab that thing out of there. It's ruin the picture here.
Yeah.
And however, when you aren't doing those things, if you go out, you planted late, you know that you didn't, you're maybe going to get a harvest, but not as much as you would have if you'd planted on time. Your rows are a bit crooked, so you plowed up half your row when you were trying to cultivate, and your germination was spotty, and then you just saw half of this bed wash away because of a big rainstorm, and you didn't get the water diverted, and what happens to your joy?
Yeah. It turns into overwhelm. It turns into
Yeah,
overwhelm. And then you're
it
like,
turns
how can
into
I,
over.
yeah, how can I catch up? Oh, wait, there is no catching up. Throw your hands up in the air. You know what? Let's go to the city and do something easy.
Exactly. So what happens is when you lose your joy, we always say you got to monitor your joy level, because typically a loss of joy is an indication of overextending yourself more,
Mm.
to try to manage more than you can manage well. So once you're, it's an indication that these first three are not being able to be done with the time that you've allocated. We talk about budgeting money, which is really important, but oftentimes we don't apply that same thing to budgeting time. I'm like, you're obviously not going to budget $1,000 a week if you're only bringing in 500, right? But we will budget 80 hours worth of work when we only have 40,
Mm.
without even really thinking about it often. And so
Right.
then we're being stingy, or maybe we're budgeting it close, but we're not able to be generous
Mm.
with the management we're giving to every element of our farm. And so when that joy level falls, it's often an indication of a lack of faithfulness. And if we don't readjust, then like you said, that discouragement means that now we don't want to even go look at the garden anymore. I'm like, because it just discourages me even more. So it demotivates us for doing the very three things that we need to do in order to have the joy in the first place. So that's what happens when you start losing your joy. You lose your work ethic, you lose your passion to go put into practice what you actually are wanting to do, and it's just a downward spiral. Whereas what we want it to be is an upward spiral. We get joy, so we're motivated to go out there and be even more faithful, which then brings us more joy, and so on and so forth.
What are the weeds in the garden that kill joy? Name them. Those ones
Yeah.
that you just can't seem to get ahead of. What are they?
Oh, I think it just year after year, it is this very thing I'm talking about. Oh, like trying to do more than I really have the resources to invest in.
Mm.
And I think I, as a visionary, sometimes discourage my family by saying, all right, guys, here's what we're going to do today. And it really is not at all. Like I'm casting a vision so big that there's no way we're going to do it. Right. And I'm trying to inspire by the potential vision. And instead, it ends up discouraging us because we get one thing done on the 50 list dream thing that I just cast a vision for. And that really kills joy. So I think there's this idea of eating the elephant one bite at a time.
Mm.
Yes, we want to have the vision of the elephant that we can get, but being willing to be humble with the limitations God's put on us at this season in our life, and be grateful and faithful within those confines, so that maybe we only plant 1/4 of the garden this year, but it's awesome.
Mm.
And we do everything we know we're supposed to do. And prioritizing my to-do list over relationships is a big joy killer. If I'm not matching my expectations up to reality, whenever my kids are really frustrated or I'm really frustrated, we've in the past we'd like to ask ourselves the question, what is it that you want that you're not getting? And I can always typically say, well, I wanted to get these carrots planted before supper time, and it looks like it's not going to happen. So I'm really starting to get on edge here. When another kid comes that needs help with something else, I'm like, now kind of upset. We're losing our joy. The kids really wanted to go swim, and dad's project's taking way longer than he thought. And so we're probably not going to go to swim. That idea of not taking one bite at a time and then celebrating and then taking another bite is really what tends to kill our joy. Not having the right expectations, not being committed to just that process of gratitude to accomplish one thing at a time, is so much what often kills our joy, at least as a family.
Yeah, I think back to all the conversations I've had with different farmers and even home growers, and I feel like this is one of the biggest things out there. We come spring, we're recording this at spring, you kind of feel like you're ahead of the curve a lot of times. And you're like, well, I can maybe plant a little bit more. I can add, let's add another planting of this here or here. And before you know it, you've tripled your garden size. You've incorporated 5 new animals into the program. Whatever it may be. You added piano and an extra, season of soccer or whatever it is into your life. And before you know it, you're like, oh, wait, I totally didn't account for the fact we have to mow the lawn at least once this summer. Like, we have no margin, right? It's like, right. So what is our encouragement for the new gardener? How can we say it enough of start small and celebrate that victory?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to just say that I thought was a really neat insight that I got from one of my, when I was in Africa, this question was posed to me, how much should you plant? And the answer is, how much can you weed? Not how much can you plant. You can plant a lot in springtime, right? But it's so much of my own character, and the reality of life is manifested through how well I maintain what I start or finish what I start. But maintenance is where the rubber meets the road, in terms of faithfulness, because it takes a lot of character to maintain versus the other. And so what I really like to encourage new gardeners or gardeners that are overwhelmed, that are wanting to get a reset, let's say, is pick a spot that is so much less than you think you can handle that it's ridiculous, right?
Right.
3 foot by 3 foot, or maybe your garden's like 50 by 60 now and you're like 10 foot by 10 foot. It's a little bitty area, and commit that to be your showcase garden this year. That means if you're slammed, you don't have time for weeding the rest of the garden, at least you're going to take care of this spot here. Because as you get overwhelmed with what you typically are going to overcommit to over here, you can always come back to your showcase garden and say, but this is what I know how to do. This is where I'm applying everything I've already learned about soil care and crop management and interplay, all the cool things I know that I'm so frustrated that I can't implement on this entire massive plot that I optimistically thought I could implement all this on. Right. At least here I'm showcasing and applying what I do know. And the funny thing is, you often harvest as much off of that teeny little showcase garden as you do off the rest of the garden put together. And then you'll realize next year you only need 2 showcase gardens. You can grow biomass and compost material in the rest of the garden. But you have to overcorrect sometimes. Doesn't mean you can't do the rest of your garden, but overcorrect with a showcase garden to really gain the joy of doing something well and faithfully, and then use that as a good kind of some data to understand next year what would be more realistic for you to actually do.
Man, I think that's so good. I'm gonna take it like this, even though I'm not taking it like that. It's like shots fired. How much character do you have as to how many weeds are in your garden? Oh, you got me right. Like, okay, so if we liken the character or the fortitude or our ability to manage a garden to um, that level, uh, how do we spin that in a positive way as a reflection on who we are? Is it a mirror? Is that garden kind of a mirror image of kind of some areas that we need to work on in our life, or is it just a reflection of, hey, you take on too much?
Well, here's a more convicting quote that my mentor Brian Oldry, that started Foundations for Farming in Africa, would always ask, and he would say, "You can
Mhm.
tell the state of a man's heart by the way his field looks."
Mm.
And I think we have to take that not just in terms of the critical approach, like way that we could feel, oh, like that must mean that I'm a bad farmer if my field doesn't look perfect, right?
Mhm.
Uh, but it's kind of that we, if the positive side of that is understanding that if I go out and look at my garden right now, my field, my farm, which right now, if you came and looked at my farm, maintenance is not top of what you would say I'm excelling in right now. We are, struggling to get our systems in place. We're just had a baby. We're just, like, if you look at my farm, it's going to tell you a lot about me right now. And life is more complex than just my farm management. So
Mm.
I need to be saying, well, how well now does my farm match, my lifestyle, like what else is going on in my life, et cetera. And sometimes it's like a friend of mine, he was running a farm, and then his dad had to move, but like he had to become full-time caretaker for his dad who was not doing well, and he did that for maybe 5 years. And I would talk to him, and he's like, man, my garden is so grown up, and my fence rows, I haven't gotten to clean them out and all this stuff. And for me, anyways, I was telling him, like, what? Yeah, somebody can come and say, man, that guy's not taking care of his garden like he should. But I feel like God looks at that and says, this is a worthy sacrifice in a sense. This guy's given up, like,
Mm.
what he loves, and to care for his dad. He's prioritizing this relationship to care for his father in a way that shows how much it's costing him out here, you know,
Mm.
in work on the farm. And so obviously we'd like to say, well, what could you adjust for that, and how could you still kind of be faithful with it? But I guess the most helpful things in life are those things that give us um, the ability to see where we're failing and where we need to improve,
Mm.
because there's no way to get better other than that. I just got a great email from a guy the other day. He's like, here's how you could do better with your emails that you're sending out. And I was
Yeah.
like, I love that. That is, I mean, like without that, I'm like flying blind. I have no idea where I'm going. But it's great with your farm. Your animals will tell you, if there's something about your management that needs to improve. And
Mm.
so rather than being discouraged, what we should do is go out and say, what is this telling me? Not just about how bad a farmer I am or gardener I am. What is it telling me about my management that I could adjust in order
Mhm.
to manage more faithfully what I do have in light of what I've been given, so that
Right.
my time and my resources can match, because then your joy will return. And then there's hope rather than just overwhelm of, okay, yeah, I'm just not good enough to do it. Instead, take notes. It's a gift to see that visibly, because there's a lot of areas of life where we fail,
Mm.
and we can't see the weeds that visibly until it's too late. And we
Right.
can't adjust.
Right. Right. Man, this has been such a great conversation. Noah, thank you so much for kind of steering us into this direction of like finding joy back in the garden. And I think so often we can get into the nitty-gritty in this, the How I Grow This podcast of, well, these are how the carrots grow, and this is start to finish. We use this drip line with this automation with this, and you're kind of standing back at a 30,000 foot view and saying, yeah, but at what cost? And if we lose our joy, are we going to be doing that for the next generation? If we lose our
Exactly.
imagination and our creativity, and how can we use this garden space to inspire our next generation? Because I've been doing some research on an upcoming podcast that we're going to do, talking about the victory gardens and the depression gardens and the difference therein, and government propaganda. And I think we're in this wave of a resurgence of people in the garden in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there has to be some intentionality around these ideas of joy and creativity and an ability to manage it. I've seen it so often, and I've been a part of gardens, and I confess, my gardens have gone to that point where it's like, man, this guy had the gumption to get going. He did a lot of things right, but his character through the busy season didn't reflect good cultivation techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Or something I want to mention is sometimes this guy's garden looks amazing. Mm-hmm. And it's because it's a lot easier to work in the garden than it is to deal with the issue that you're having with your wife in the house.
Ooh, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
There it is.
Yeah,
man. Whew. That's good for those of you. Hopefully that's not your case. Hopefully, we're striving towards using this garden as a reflection of our character and an expression of our creativity, and we're intentional in all areas. We're intentional in the garden. We're intentional with our homes and our families, with our kids. Here's the challenge to you: go buy Hobbit uniforms. And uniforms. Better yet, make them.
Make
them, and create that experience. Take the shoes off in the garden. Get the bare feet on. It'll be good for your health. It'll be good for your imagination, and you'll thrive in a level that you've never thrived before. And that's how Noah Sanders grows this. Noah, thank you so much for this time. It has been absolutely a blast. So I just want to say, hey, where can people find you and what you're up to? Just a shout out to all the things that you're doing. Where can people find you?
Yeah, probably my main website, redeemingthedirt.com, has links to all our different things that we're doing. We have a YouTube channel you can look up, have the Redeeming the Dirt podcast. So if you're Googling Redeeming the Dirt, that'll give you a lot of the links to our resources. But that would be what I would recommend people do.
Awesome. Noah, thank you so much for the time. I'm sure we're going to have you back on the show because that was just so rich and good. But everybody else, get out there, get to the field, and just keep growing no matter what in all areas of life. See you, everybody. Man, thanks for staying tuned all the way to the end. We're so excited that you're here, and that probably means that you enjoyed what you heard. You found some value in it. If you could, go and share this with somebody that you know that really helps push it forward in the algorithm. Hit a like, a subscribe, hit a review. It makes all the difference for us. Thank you for listening to the How I Grow This podcast, and we are dedicated to bringing more of these stories to you to help you grow at the next level. We'll see you.